So I want to share some stories with you about experience that I've had starting first as a consultant and now as an employee at Vistaprint, and how we've applied the Kanban method to transform an advertising agency. Okay. So first of all, just take a minute or two. We're not going to do any serious exercise here, don't have a lot of time, but just give some thought, right? So can a software methodology like Kanban work far outside of engineering? Right? Could it work for an advertising agency? Just give that some thought, because when I first started talking about bringing Agile and Lean and Kanban into our agency.
I'm going to have you move to this side.
Okay. The video wants me on this side. Okay, I move all over the place, but I'll accommodate the videographer and not make the camera go crazy. So that was a big question, right? Could you possibly, how could you possibly apply an engineering discipline to something as crazy as advertising? And I'll show you what we did, and you can think about whether it worked for you. So like I said, there's a series of stories here to be told. It's actually 4 layers. I want to start with the company story. You may have heard of the company Vistaprint. You might have seen our ads. But we're a company in transition. A company that about 20 years ago was started in our founder's apartment in Paris. Today, it's a $1.2 billion worldwide company. And we're part of an even bigger organization than that. We're transforming our strategy, transforming the way we handle our marketing, the way we deal with finance. I just want to tell you a little bit about our story. So many of you have probably heard of Vistaprint as the free business card company. Right? And we actually made money on free business cards. Right? The more we sold, the more we. But we're now a much more diversified company. We have, each year, we sell to 17 million unique customers, all through the web. And our model is to sell to micro businesses, that's companies of 10 employees or less. That's our primary market. We also do some consumer work. And it's basically anything to help them market themselves, project their image. Primarily print, business cards, flyers, posters, whatever, but even digital. So we'll help set up websites and do digital services, design services, things like that. Okay? And as opposed to lots of other companies that get successful and get acquired, Vistaprint grew a parent. We decided it was a very profitable company and wanted to grow by acquisition. So they created this umbrella company called Simpress. And Vistaprint is 75% of Simpress's revenue and profits. Okay. And there are lots of other companies. We've acquired 18 other companies, mainly in Europe, some in Asia, mostly some related to digital marketing, mainly related to online print, a lot in Europe. And I'm not going to go through all the numbers on this infographic, but one of the interesting things is that we have last year we published almost 6 billion business cards. And we do it, it's an interesting model called mass customization, where we use technology not only to sell, but also to run the back end of the business, so that we can take very small quantities, right, and customize T-shirts, bags, swag for trade shows, for very small quantities, and make it affordable for our customers. That's the underlying business model. So the transformation is from that small little startup to here. Okay? We've also transformed the way we talk to Wall Street. Our founder is very, very committed. The founder is still the CEO of the parent company, and he's committed to everybody taking a long-term view. And one of the things he's done is we no longer give guidance to Wall Street. We don't project our quarterly revenue and profit. We don't even project our annual revenue and profit, because we don't want people to get hung up on the short-term view. And that's a message that goes down to all the employees. We've had a lot of transformations in our technology side, because while we make our money from selling printed stuff and digital services, we make we're underlying, it's this technology engine that drives it all. So 3 years ago, we were a waterfall company, classic waterfall, heavyweight documents, lots of governance, lots of time to even start projects, a lot of analysis, and business plans would sit on the shelf for years. Transformed to our technology group, mainly to Scrum, and it was opt-in. We've provided an education framework, but we didn't require any methodology. We're agnostic to methodology. We have some standard tools, but people can bring in their own tools. So it's an opt-in model. If people want training, we provide it through our coaching staff. And we've even got our product marketing organization beginning to become comfortable with being heavily involved in that role and starting to actually operate as product owners. For scaling, we've adopted the Spotify model of tribes, guilds, and squads. And we have some teams that are doing Kanbans in the technology side. I met David recently when he came to train those groups for a week, and they are just going to start piloting Swift Kanban later this week in that team. So we also transitioned, because of the transition to Agile, we were able to change the time scale of the projects that we were working on. Instead of working in projects that would take anywhere from 18 to 36 months for start to release, we're now releasing into production every 3 weeks. You got stuff that's done, it goes into the release. It's not ready, the train leaves the station, you wait for the next train. Every 3 weeks on that cadence. We transitioned from staged phased gate reviews with lots and lots of approvals and governance to an idea pipeline. And that pipeline, the primary metric that we apply is flow. And our flow metric includes a discovery phase. So from the time that a project gets into the idea pipeline until the time that we've completed discovery, that's our primary flow metric. Okay. And then there's creative, our internal advertising agency. If you work inside the agency, if you work on the creative side, you might be a graphic designer, you might be a photographer, copywriter, experienced designer, because the experienced designers who design the customer's journey through the website as part of our advertising agency, or a video producer, because we do a lot of broadcast print and radio broadcast and TV advertising, and the production for that is handled internally. So that is the agency, or the advertising agency. Now, the agency model has a very interesting impact because it's modeled to some extent, to a great extent, on what happens in the outside world. It used to be in 1950s, Mad Men. Now it's more likely to see younger women working in the marketing departments, all very bright, good college grads, typically bachelors in business and raring to go. But the model, the agency model that we look at, gives us a perspective that we have the agency and we have clients, because that's how traditional external advertising agencies operate. Right? And the client is always right. Right? And the client is the person who has the decision rights, and the client is the person who you have to please. And most importantly, you have to look very professional when you're presenting your concepts, when you're presenting your executions, your graphics, your text, your subject lines for your email. It has to look very professional. It has to be sharp, because otherwise you don't look like you're professional to your client. And that created a very interesting dynamic between the advertising agency and their internal customer, their internal client, who is our marketing group. And our marketing group controls an annual spend of approximately $300 million. So they really have the power in the company. So you've got to really please the clients. Okay? Now, if you were in the project manager and you had just reduced your lead times from 18 months and you were releasing into production every 3 weeks, and somebody said, you've got to get the agency to do some work for you, and the agency's lead time, because the agency was in this old model, was at least 12 weeks, right? The agency was your worst nightmare. That's the way the project managers looked at it. Okay? That's where I came on the scene. I'm an Agile coach. I started as an external consultant. These are some of the other companies I've coached for as an Agile and Lean coach. And I'm now a Vistaprint employee as part of our Lean and Agile coaching team. And we had gone through a classic cycle of observing what was happening in the advertising agency within the creative organization and their clients, and analyzed it, looked at some data. Okay? And then I came along and I looked at some of that data, and the first thing I had to do was talk to the vice president of the agency and look at it and said, okay, we've got some problems here. You'd like me to help. What's your model? What does success look like for you? What is she looking for? And she said, I'm tired of being blamed for always being late. Because every project that called for creative work seemed to become the blame, in some cases was the bottleneck, but was always being blamed for everything being late. In particular, with the email team, they were almost always late. So then I went over and talked to her counterpart, the vice president of channel marketing, and she was tired of being blamed. She was blamed for using too much of the creative resources. So the goal was, how can we use less resources and get those lead times down, to avoid being late. And then there was the team story, right? What was their process? What did it feel like to them? These are words from the members of the creative team, the designers, the copywriters, the proofreaders, the production designers. This is how they felt. And that last word that came up, siloed, is probably the biggest key to me. So we had this value stream map, and I'm going to dig down. Some of this is hard to read. I'm going to dig down and drill down in some of the more interesting aspects of this. But it was by looking at this value stream map and looking at the calendar time that it took to get things done versus the actual work hours, we had a process efficiency of about 3%. And it was pretty obvious we had a flow problem. So here's one example. Just to initiate a project, getting a project manager assigned, reviewing, kickoff, and then actually doing the 2 hours of creative work took 21 business days. The internal review, that was the art director had to review and approve the work before you could show it to the client. Okay? To get 8 hours worth of work done took a full business week. Okay? And then just the stuff at the end, right? The handoffs and the QA, etc. To get a little bit more than a day's worth of work done took 18 business days. This was just a... So you kind of ask yourself, how could it possibly take that long to do one email? Right? I mean, I must do 20, 25 emails a day. I don't know about you. I get a couple of hundred, I must respond to at least 20 or 25 of them. So let me give you just a little peek at what some of these emails look like. So here's an example. Starts off, got a little bit of animation. Got to have all the colors right to match the brand standards, okay, the dates. Okay. And then, you can't see it on this being washed out, but this is actually an email that I received because I'm a Vistaprint customer. This is my logo. That's my business card. So they were actually able to retrieve my business card that I had ordered through Vistaprint and get it, automate through a little bit of automation, actually put it into the email that they were sending me. And then, of course, all the other things that they thought I might be interested in buying, T-shirts, signs with my logo on it, banners, all sorts of other things. Okay? So it's actually a fairly complex amount of work and a lot of design work, a little bit of scripting. Those are the kinds of things. That's why it can actually take that much. So the work hours are actually not that unreasonable. Right? The total calendar time was absurd. Right? So went through and basically applied the Kanban method to this process to demonstrate that when you've got work items that are mainly creative elements that are about the same size, relatively small, and continuous flow. Every single day of every single work day, we send out 5 million emails, and there might be a couple of different, and that's just in North America. Worldwide, we probably send out about 20 million emails. And for many of our campaigns, they will go out in 14 languages. So there's a localization component as well. So this is a continuous, it's almost like a continuous flow operation because absolutely every single day we are dropping. We even do emails on weekends to some of our customers. So it's close to continuous flow as you can see in this kind of work. Okay. So we set up, initially did a, make the work visible. Each of these tickets represents what will eventually become an email. It was originally set up with working in progress and done columns. And again, we have the internal and the client. These tags were color-coded by skill set, designer, writer, production artist. And they were effectively avatars, didn't have any pictures on them, but little names. And we could watch the work flow through. We had a little area here where people could indicate when they were on vacation, paid time off. We had some discovery work going on here in the with an idea pipeline. And originally the thought was, well, we could just limit WIP by the number of swim lanes, because if you ran out of swim lanes, you couldn't do any more work. But the team was too smart and they cheated and they found ways to break the WIP limits. But it was a first attempt, a little better than Proto Kanban, but not everything we needed. Then we introduced class as a service. And this was key, and if I have time to, at the end, I'll show you an example. It was really helpful. But most of the work, the business as usual, the normal work flowed through this column. The rush column would go through here. Now, when the lead time was 8 weeks, and anything that was requested in 3 weeks or less automatically became a rush, because a lot of what we do in this business is fixed date delivery. It's mainly at holiday season we go crazy, and holidays come and holidays go. We have an annual sale that comes and goes on a particular date. We have a Mother's Day sale. We can't redefine Mother's Day. So we do a lot of stuff that's driven by the calendar that's fixed date. And when you have long lead times, you end up with an awful lot of stuff going through rush. As we got the lead time down, the rushes became rarer and rarer, and almost, and we could start enforcing real WIP limits around the rush column. The low and the special columns were particularly useful because that's where we could keep people fully occupied doing work, but when a rush ticket or an expedite came through, we actually had some slack in the system. We could take them off the low priority stuff, put them on the high priority stuff and on the expedited stuff, and not damage the business. Introduced actual WIP limits. So one of the nice things about a Kanban board that's tape on a painted, this is idea paint, is that it's very easy to rip it down and start over again. Maybe not quite as easy if you're online electronic with a really good Kanban tool that you can move your columns around left and right, but to maintain the value of the physical board and be able to rip that board apart, we did this like every 2 or 3 months as we learned more, and just ripping off that paper, and we'd have a Kanban design party on a Friday afternoon, and on Monday we had a new design up in place. So you can see that we're starting to introduce some WIP limits. The WIP limit over here applied to this whole group of columns. And that was basically, we had 4 designers, so it was 1 per designer. This was more our handoff to our clients, and these were pre-production steps down there. And then we started tracking cycle time and lead time. And in particular, we were able to, since we were serving many different channels, we were mainly email, but doing work for the email channel, the brand work, our print, because we still do hard copy print catalogs, our strategic work. So for each of those different work types, which had different complexity, we would track the trend lines. We're tracking trend lines by month for the lead time and the cycle time. And now we've put this online on a dashboard. We have 8 different creative teams. They all maintain cycle time, lead time, and a couple other scores we collect. It's on a dashboard. We have a big visible screen, and we can cycle displays through that and show it to the entire local organization. So we also started looking at things that's starting to manage the flow. So one of the key items in flow that was slowing us down was this internal review process. Again, five days to get 1 day's worth of work done. So we originally had this model with the art director, where the art director had to approve 100% of the deliverables before you could even show it to the partner, before you could show it to the client, before you could to make sure it was professional. Right? And most of that time was waiting for the art director to get out of meetings or finish some other work and actually take a look at it, give you some feedback, do a little tweak, and then go through that process a couple of times. Well, to reduce that bottleneck, we went to buddy checks, pairing between designers. That was one of the ways. Yeah. Next thing we did was make our policies explicit. So this is, the team decided that as soon as they pick up a new ticket, they would typically have a kickoff meeting. If it was small, easy, clear, they wouldn't bother. But if they needed a kickoff meeting, they wanted to make sure that it was well understood of what it would take to make that kickoff meeting effective. Okay. So they would do some sketches during the day and then have an informal meeting. So this was part of the beginning to make the policies explicit. It's a little harder to read again, but another case where they were making policies explicit. Doing the design layout, getting the copy ready, getting feedback, getting the client approval, getting ready for production. Again, ways in which we made the policies explicit. And this was just the team and whiteboards and flip charts. Real low-tech, low-fidelity tools, but it really got the job done. Okay. Next was creating feedback loops. So one of the things that I find that's different in bringing lean and agile to the creative teams, as opposed to the work that I've done for years and years and years with the technology teams, is that when I'm coaching developers, the biggest challenge that I have there is getting the developers to recognize that they are responsible for quality. Now, with more modern tools, as XP practices have become more standard and are no longer agile but just best practices, it's less of a problem. But it wasn't that long ago that developers would tell me, oh, Edge case says, yeah, that's QA's problem. Or I just have to worry about, can I meet the requirements? Is it really fit for purpose? Well, that's somebody else's problem. Okay? So getting the developers to understand the value of unit testing, test-driven development, working with your QA partners, really understanding the business requirements, is something that's only, I see, coming in vogue in the last couple of years. Okay? On the creative side, they had the opposite problem. Right? There was too much feedback, too many feedback loops. Some of them were very, very high value, and that was the key. It's figuring out what were the high value feedback loops and how to reinforce those. Right? And many of them were low value. Right? So the concept of cash, how much money did we make? Right? Because with 17 million customers, we have terabytes and terabytes of data. We have huge data warehouses, BI technicians, data scientists, analysts. So we have all the data. We can figure out how much money that coupon code drove. And we can do it for all of our channels. We do that very well. But then we would get feedback from some of the managers, right? And this is an interesting story, right? So first we would have our first contact with the client would be a frontline marketing planner who would sort of lay out what they want the email to look like or whatever other campaign they were dealing with. And we'd get feedback from that client, and the client we'd rework it, and they'd say, that's great, but now I have to show it to my manager. That's Kelly here. Right? And Kelly would give us more feedback, and we'd have to implement Kelly's feedback. That's great, but Kelly's got to show it to the director, Tiffany. Okay? And Tiffany's got a whole other set of ideas, and sometimes she'd show it to her mom, and Tiffany's mom was really strict. So we'd get feedback from Tiffany's mom. Sorry. And then we'd have to go to their stakeholders. So Aaron was the customer strategy manager. So we'd have to get feedback from Aaron. And Aaron's feedback would contradict feedback we'd get from Kelly. So we'd get these feedback frenzies. So the feedback loops existed. We could document them. We could identify them. Right? But we had to find the ones that were high value, amplify those, and stamp out the ones that were low value. Then we went to the next step in the Kanban method, which is collaboration and experimentation. And while we got lots of value from those first 5 steps, it was this 6th step that made the difference. This was really the key. Okay? By encouraging experimentation and bringing the teams together to collaborate, and actually changing our language, moving from client, we no longer refer to those marketing people as clients, they were now partners because we were all in the same company. We took advantage of the fact that even though we were an internal advertising agency and had this agency model, we could actually treat our customers, our clients as partners and work more closely with them and collaborate with them. And that was a real accelerator to effectiveness and improved flow. And we had a brainstorming session, and they identified so they identified this problem in what they call decision rights. So as a company, we have a focus on making our decision process more effective. And we use a process that has explicit policies regarding decision rights. And the decision rights were way too high for at least most of the work. There are some very high impact, high risk work that you really did need a director and manager sign-offs for. But the vast majority of the work could be clearly approved by the first line marketing analyst and the marketing planners. So the hypothesis that they created was by pushing the decision rights down to the core team, we can reduce, and then they basically said from round 1 to get approval. So they could get their approvals faster. And they picked one particular example that they were going to do an experiment with. We've got 3 levels of sales, right? They code them green, red, and orange, basically having to do with the level of promotionality and their impact. And so for the green level sales, which was a lot of what we do, they decided that they could push the decision rights all the way down to the individual who was working with the creative team. For the red level sales, it needed a little bit higher sign off, and for the orange a little higher, and for the red even higher than that. And that was basically the experiment they designed. And here's the results. The first one, this green sale, performance was slightly above expectations. So even though the managers and the directors were completely out of the process, significantly increasing the flow through the system, we got slightly better results. We certainly didn't lose any money by doing that. For another next sale, it performed well above expectations. And for this orange sale, it performed exactly on expectations. So given that, we could build on the collaboration and got approval to bring the decision rights down through the system. And the data that we were able to collect, and we can collect this in like 2 or 3 days after sending out an email, because we know because these things are pretty short-lived impact, and we could see exactly how much money we're going to make on any one of those sales. It led to the value of moving things down into the organization, created collaboration, and began to break down the silos. Because it was that siloed communication where everything had to be done, approved up the line, go down, get approved up the line, come back and forth. That's what we eliminated. And the collaboration and proving that out through the experiments was the biggest, fastest way to get those benefits. And here's where we took collaboration to an even higher level. This is actually photographed in our office in Barcelona. And the screen in the back is a team in our office in Massachusetts. And around each of those screens, we have typically 2 designers, a writer, sometimes some of them are project managers, and we have the marketing partner. Now, we don't do this all the time. This is an experiment. But by having everybody engaged, having everybody collaborating, having everybody and doing this where we actually cycle people with hands on the keyboard. They even let me touch the keyboard. I have no idea how to design. I'm sitting there off in the back and hiding in the corner. We had so much collaboration that this was an exercise from one of our other teams, and they were able to reduce a process that goes from to create the storyboards for some online banner animation. That approval process, the creation work would take 20 minutes, and the end-to-end approval process would take 2 weeks. We got from beginning creation of the storyboard to approval, which in 2 hours for 4 storyboards. That's the kind of improvements you can get by applying all aspects of the Kanban method, in particular the collaboration and experimentation. So, a little bit about the story from the coaching perspective. I'm just going to give you a couple of the highlights. One of the key things we did to get this started was chartering the teams. And based on a model using Diane Larson's book on Liftoff. And basically started by bringing together the directors from the organization. And the main thing that they did was to give the teams permission to experiment, recognizing that some of those experiments are going to fail. Because if all of your experiments succeed, you're not experimenting. Okay? And an organization that doesn't really tolerate failure very well, having directors and vice presidents give individual contributors permission to fail is monumental. And that opened up a lot of what led to the other work and led to the brainstorming, which led to those experiments. We also offered a series of education. We use an education framework from a consulting company that I used to work with called Emergent. They have a series of 18 books and training material that goes with each of them. And for the teams, we created an education vision to give them the work that they needed. And it is agnostic to different methodologies. We have both Scrum and Kanban books we teach from. Now, I want to give you a little bit of the team story because one of the teams that I worked with was so proud of what they did that they put this material together and they presented it at a company meeting. So I'll share some of that. So that's the way they felt before they started with Agile. They were working nights and weekends, and they were always late. They were under the gun for time frames, working nights, weekends, and they were still late. Right? So they were really unhappy. Right? And these were some of the issues they faced. The feedback swirls that I talked about, all those feedback frenzies. Right? The unclear decision rights. Right? You go into a meeting, and they say, okay, we're going to present some stuff. We want some feedback and some decisions. Is the decision maker here? Well, they didn't know because it wasn't clear. Right? And they personally knew that it was taking far too long to complete their work, and they weren't happy about it. So we were focused on a dedicated team, brought together this was focusing on our North American email team. Right? Got some alignment. Got all these informal touch points. Instead of going up the line and down the line, we started bringing the marketing partner in earlier and started to understand their business need, understand what would be success for our customers. Okay. Had some team outings. Right. There were some really good ice cream stores down the street, or bring in pizza. We're really good at doing food, so we did food. And they asked for some agile coaching and training, so we helped a bit. We were part of this. One of the things that they did was part of it was to implement retrospectives. And one of the things that I strongly recommended is that they start every retrospective as part of setting the stage to go back and look at Don Kurth's Prime Directive. Okay? And you can read it. It's basically understanding and truly believe that everybody did the best job they could. They knew at their time, right, their skills and abilities, the resources available in the situation at hand. It's basically no blame. The vice presidents wanted to eliminate blame. The teams were tired of being blamed. So they could get together and have some really hard conversations, okay, and talk about some of these issues, okay, and eliminate the problem from the blame. So they were beginning to feel agile. Okay. These are some of the lean practices they implemented. They had the daily stand-up at the Kanban board. They used the idea pipeline. Marketing promotions have some long lead time. We plan out every customer promotion for an entire quarter in advance. Now, we could probably do better as we get leaner, but that's the way it happens. Okay? So, and that gets approved in the middle of the previous quarter. So 6 weeks ahead of time, they would create tickets and go into the backlog for every single item 4.5 months out in advance. And so the backlog was enormous, and if that was all in the on-deck column, if anybody was at David's talk last night, when he separated out next from backlog, when we separated out on deck from this idea pipeline, it made the world a difference. Because people could focus on what they knew they had to do coming up shortly. And as I mentioned, we introduced retrospectives. So these were some of the practices the team introduced. And then they had to deal with decisions. How do you make the decision process more effective? So they felt the problem with the decision effectiveness problem. The opportunity was that it was taking far too long to go through, to get through all that feedback. They had the hypothesis that I showed you before, which was if they could get the decision rights pushed down, that they could get through the number of feedback loops would be reduced, and they could maintain quality, maintain the business outcome. Okay? And you saw the results. That also impacted lead time. So what they were able to do, they started out in January where their average lead time was 40 days. By May, they got that down to 15 days, 63% reduction. By October, that was down to 7 days. Overall, 83% reduction in lead time by applying the Kanban method and the processes we talked about. For cycle time, they started out at an average of 15 days. By May, got that down to 8. By October, it was down to 4 days. 73% overall reduction in cycle time. As I said before, almost everything was late. Now, 43% of the time they were early. And early was actually good because it relieved some pressure from the downstream processes that weren't under the gun. 36% was exactly on time. And 21% was late. This number, they're working on reducing this even further. But real big wins in that. And that's the team. And I'm the old guy in the corner, and I get to work with all these bright, young, energetic women who are fantastic at creative and project management and marketing and art direction. And that's some of the things they gained from this. Now, one little post note, be a story. Anybody watch Good Morning America? Oh, you see that? All right. Well, some of you do. One of the big morning news shows. They have a section called Deals and Steals, and we're one of the sponsors of that. Last week was Small Business Week. A month before that, we got an opportunity to have a segment where they would film live in 5 different cities every day during the week, featuring a Vistaprint customer. And we gave each of those customers a grant. They were surprised. We gave them a grant of $10,000 because they were doing something important. So one small organization was ordering postcards that they could send to military people being offshore. And you can imagine the amount of work that had to be done. We got a van and we had to wrap it in our own designs. We sent people to each of the companies. We had to put out TV advertising. We had to send out emails announcing this on 4 weeks' notice. Now, with 12-week lead times, 8-week lead times, we never would have been able to do that. Okay? Or it would have gotten done. It would have gotten done kind of okay, and other things that were important would have fallen on the floor. Because something that big, that visible, it has to happen, but it wouldn't have been. This got done. It got done at fantastic levels of quality, great spirit throughout the company, and nothing important fell on the floor. The things that got deferred were things that were low value, so we could get by with that. So we're now bringing this process to throughout the entire advertising agency, throughout the entire creative team, including our office in Barcelona, where we have similar teams, and we're now doing global tickets, and most of our work is going out in 6 to 14 languages, including the work that originally was just done in 3 languages in North America. So that's our results. That's contact information. You can find me on LinkedIn or tweet. And we got a few minutes for questions.
Thank you. David, you were measuring the value stream map before. How are you actually measuring the lead time?
The lead time, all of our data, all of our projects at the time were being handled through a workflow system, which used to be called at task. It's now Workfront. So before we switched to Agile, every transition, every handoff between those steps was tracked through Workfront, and people would enter time, so we were doing time tracking. Now that we've reduced the lead times and the process is a lot smoother, we still use Workfront, but we only track beginning and end time. So we still do cycle time and lead time through Workfront, but it's a manual process that the project manager enters the begin date and the end date.
Can you talk a little bit about how you broke down the work for some of the teams?
Well, the work tended to be relatively small to begin with because it was typically described for one email at a time. And then when they broke it down into the specific skill sets, that work would be done dynamically because there was some work that copywriters had to do, some stuff designers had to do, some stuff that production artists had to do, some stuff that photographers had to do. There were some things that were bigger, and we went through I briefly mentioned the education vision, so we taught them how to apply what we call 6 different prisms, lenses to decompose, sometimes by geography, sometimes by urgency, so different ways to decompose the work. So one of the things we would do would be we'd do some of these extended campaigns, like a friends and family campaign, which would be 5 emails. Well, we'd say start with the first one. That might be 60% of the work. Decompose that, and then break the others up into smaller pieces. The bigger challenge we had was actually swarming, getting multiple people to work on the same ticket, which originally they said, it's impossible. You cannot possibly have 2 designers working on the same ticket. until they had to, and we had 4 or 5 designers working on the same ticket. That help?
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the swarming, as well as, I'm not sure if there's any opportunities for kind of any fungibility. So was it always going to be the copywriter working on the copyright, photo as photo, and the art? And so you showed a little bit of how they're all working together. I was wondering if you have any other instances of how that happened.
Okay. Like I said, originally they were dead set against swarming. They just didn't see how it could be done.
Yeah.
But we had one project, again, some opportunity popped up at the last minute to do some high-value work, but it was like get a month's worth of work done in a week, and they realized the only way they could do that was to have 2 or 3 designers working on the same ticket. Now that we're working globally, they're starting to do some experiments where they'll start design on one ticket in Barcelona because they're ahead of time, and when they go to work, they go to let's take it as far as they can, and they'll indicate the status and put it in a repository, and then somebody can come in Massachusetts a few hours later and start working on it. So actually they have a few hours overlap. So they're starting to do that kind of swarming. The fungibility of skills, the slide that I showed is a very, very recent slide, just the last week or so. And it was what we believe to be the world's first instance of mob design. I don't know if anybody's heard of mob programming. So if you've heard of mob programming, a couple of weeks ago in Cambridge, Mass, we had the first conference on mob design. Woody's Will and Falco were key people there. They've been teaching it around the world for a long time, but this was the first conference. Our art director from our Barcelona office attended that, spoke to Woody and said, has anybody ever done this in design? He said, not as far as I know. So in that example, we had 2 designers, a writer, a project manager, and a coach, 1 keyboard. The person on the keyboard was the driver. Everybody behind was a navigator. Every 7 minutes, music went off, and we rotated. And I learned a little bit about how to use Photoshop. Somebody had to remind me how to use an Apple mouse. Our project manager got a chance to do a little bit of design. The copywriter got it. So the benefits of pairing and the osmosis effect that happens by somebody behind you telling, Command T, click here, etc., you begin to understand how to use the tools and eventually begin to learn the actual skills behind it. So it's basically pairing on steroids. So looks like we're out of time, and there is another session here. I hope this was helpful for you, and thank you all very much.